So our chapter is reproduction. As we know, reproduction is the production of young ones having the same features as the parents. So in case of humans, the reproduction is sexual in nature. That means the male gamete sperm and the female gamete ovum has to meet one another, and then they have to unite with one another to produce the offspring. So before we start with reproduction, we all have seen some changes in our body happening when we reached 13 to 14 years of age. This time period is known as puberty, and a lot of physical changes happens in our body. For example, enlargement of breasts in case of females, deepening of the voice in case of males, growth of beard in case of males. So these features occur during puberty stage. And from the onset of puberty, the reproductive stage of the person or of the human being begins. So what are the changes, what are the secondary sexual features which can occur in the person during this puberty stage? Distribution of hair on the body and the face, especially in males. Development of breasts in females. Males also develop a strong muscular structure during this time. The voice also changes, especially for males, and females also develop a little high pitch voice. So this is all about things which we can observe from outside. But what happens internally? Let's see. So there are certain organs for reproduction in our body. There are certain primary reproductive organs which are the main organs responsible for the entire procedure of reproduction, and there are also some accessory reproductive parts which are not actually performing the main activity, but they are supporting the entire process to happen. So the primary reproductive parts are the gonads. We have studied about this a little bit in the endocrine system chapter. So the gonads are of two types. For males it is called testes, and for females it is called ovaries. These gonads release the gametes or the sex cells which will form the baby when they will get united. So in males the testes produces sperms, and in case of females the ovaries will produce ovum or eggs. Also, there are certain reproductive parts which are not directly linked with the production of gametes, but they help the two cells to unite with one another. They are called the accessory reproductive parts, and we are going to learn about each one of them in detail. So in case of males, the gonads or the major reproductive part is the testis. Then there are certain accessory reproductive parts called ducts. These ducts are of three types: epididymis, sperm duct or vas deferens, and ejaculatory duct. So it is like a pathway, we will learn. Next are certain glands whose secretions are very essential for the process to occur. So these glands are prostate gland, Cowper's gland, and seminal vesicle. Next is another part which is known as the penis, and we are going to learn about the activity of each one of them. Next, for females, the major reproductive organ is the ovaries, which is producing the ovum. Next are the oviducts or the fallopian tubes. Next is the uterus, vagina, and vulva. Let's first read about the male reproductive parts. So testis has two functions. It contains a group of tube-like structures or tubules, a highly coiled structure called seminiferous tubules, which will produce the sperms. And this process of production of sperms is known as spermatogenesis. Next are certain specialized cells called interstitial cells. They produce the male hormone testosterone. This hormone is not only essential for the production of sperms, but they also provide some sexual characteristics to males. For example, the growth of body hair, the growth of beard, all this is also performed by the testosterone. Now what do we observe? That the two testes which is producing the sperm, it is not located inside the body. Rather it hangs out of the body in a sac-like structure which is known as scrotum. So in case of males there are two such structures. So why these structures are located outside the body? The reason is, outside the body the temperature is a little lower, but inside the body the temperature is higher. So the production of sperms require a little lower temperature. As a result, the scrotum is located outside the body so that the sperms can be produced in a lower temperature. So what is the pathway which is followed by the sperms? Like I told you that the ducts help in passage of the sperm throughout the reproductive tract of the males. So first of all, the sperms are produced in the seminiferous tubules. From there it is transferred to the epididymis, then to the sperm duct, and then to the ejaculatory duct, through which it comes out into the penis or the urethra, and then it is transferred to the female body. So now the urethra through which males urinate and the penis, which is the reproductive organ, both are the same passage. But in case of females, the passage for urine and the reproductive passage is completely different. So this is another major difference between the male and the female reproductive system. Next are certain accessory glands which pour certain secretions into the ejaculate. We will learn about it. How is it essential? First of all, the seminal vesicles. They are located between the posterior surface, that means between the back surface of the urinary bladder and the rectum. Rectum is the part through which fecus is released. So between these two parts, between the urinary bladder and the rectum, there lies a special gland known as seminal vesicle. So what is its function? It produces a secretion which serves as a medium for the transportation of sperms. So we will try to understand this after we study about semen. Next is the prostate gland. It is located around the urethra, close to its origin from the bladder. So between the urinary bladder and the urethra, this prostate gland is located. It is also pouring a secretion which is alkaline in nature. So why is it secreted? Because the female vagina is acidic in nature. So in order to neutralize it, as we know, acid plus base gives salt and water. So since the female vagina is acidic, in order to neutralize the acidic condition, the prostate gland will secrete an alkaline secretion. Next are the Cowper's gland or the bulbourethral gland. It is located just before the urethra opens into the penis. That means between the urethra and the penis. Its function is to release a secretion which will serve as a lubrication. Just like we use oil for lubrication of machines, similarly, the secretion by the Cowper's gland will also serve as a lubrication during the process of copulation or mating. Now, penis is a very important part, although it is not taking direct action of gametes, but it is helping in transferring the sperms from the male body to the female body. Now, what is semen? It is a milk-like fluid which contains sperms predominantly, but it also contains the secretions of the glands which we just learned. So now talking about the seminal vesicles function, whatever semen is produced, most of it contains the fluid which is released by the seminal vesicle. It contains sperm, but it also contains the fluid which is released by the seminal vesicle. It helps in the transportation of sperm. It makes it liquidy in nature. So as you can see in the figure over here, the parts have been mentioned in detail. So questions can come based on labeling. So in case of males, how does the sperm gets released and what is its entire pathway? Let's see. First of all, in the testis, in both of these regions, the sperms are produced, and then you can see there is a thin sperm duct which is arising from the testis. So the sperms are transferred using this sperm duct into the urethral region or into the penis region. Next, let's talk about the female reproductive parts. So first of all are the ovaries, which are the gonads. They produce the female gamete called ovum or egg. So the process of production of ovum is known as oogenesis, and this is done by specialized group of cells which we will learn here. Also, the ovaries produce the two hormones estrogen and progesterone. Later in the chapter, we will also learn that there is another structure called placenta which releases these hormones during pregnancy. So there are certain important terms which I have written in green. The maturing egg contained in a cellular sac is called the follicle. You can see the diagram below. Initially, the egg, which I have denoted by orange color, that is contained in a protective sac. The sac basically is known as follicle. So with time, as the development occurs, the egg also grows in size. Along with that, the sac also grows in size and the sac gets filled with a fluid. This structure is known as Graafian follicle. Now what happens after the entire maturation process is complete, the Graafian follicle will rupture and the egg will be released. So this process of rupture of the follicle releasing the egg is known as ovulation. The egg is getting released. Now what happens, the egg has been released. Now whatever remaining part of the Graafian follicle is there, that will stay for some time, that will persist for some time, and slowly it will convert into a yellow mass which is known as corpus luteum. So these are the processes which happen when an ovum is maturing. Now there are other structures. First of all, the oviducts or the fallopian tubes. It helps in transferring this ovum to the uterus. The uterus is another structure which we will learn in the later part again. So uterus is located in the pelvic cavity, that means in the lower abdominal region. It protects and nourishes the growing embryo. After fertilization occurs and after the baby starts developing in the mother's body, the uterus is the part where the baby stays. Next is the vagina. So the vagina receives the sperms. We have just studied about it. And the vulva is the external part of the female reproductive tract. This is actually like a protective covering. It will protect the underlying urethra and vagina. As you can see in the figure over here, This is the uterus which will carry the child, and then we have tube-like structures on either sides. These are called the fallopian tubes, and then we have two ovaries on either side from where the ovum is released. So what happens basically? The egg is released by the ovum and it travels through the fallopian tube. During this time, if a sperm enters the female body, fertilization might occur. We will learn about it in the next part itself. But if there is no sperm during that time, what will happen? This layer or this lining of the uterus, this will start thickening, expecting the arrival of a baby. But when that doesn't happen, this layer which has just thickened, that will shed off. That will shed off from the female body, and it will also cause bleeding for a few days. Along with that, the ovum which was released, that will also shed out of the body. This process is known as menstruation. And this entire process does not happen in a single day. It happens over a period of almost 28 days in a female body. And this cycle is known as menstrual cycle. So if fertilization doesn't occur, only under that condition menstruation will occur. But if fertilization occurs, we will learn what will happen. So what is menstrual cycle basically? It is the entire procedure of 28 days almost, in which the uterine lining or the lining of the uterus thickens, expecting the arrival of the embryo, but when it doesn't happen, it will shed off along with the rupture of blood vessels, resulting in bleeding. So there are two stages in case of female, once when menstruation starts and once when it stops completely. But for males it doesn't happen. Sperms are produced throughout the lifetime after puberty. But for females it stops after a certain age. So the onset of menstruation or the beginning of menstruation, it generally happens during the age of 13 to 14 years during puberty, and this is known as menarche. And when it stops completely, almost at the age of 45 to 50, this is known as menopause. As you can see in the figure below, the uterine lining initially was thin, but now it has thickened. It was waiting for the arrival of an embryo, but when it doesn't happen, this entire portion is removed from the body. And the blood vessels also get ruptured, which actually causes bleeding, and again it becomes thin, and again the next cycle starts. So it lasts for almost 28 days, but it can differ from person to person. So there are 4 stages of this menstrual cycle also. Let's see. First of all is the menstrual phase or the bleeding phase, like I just told you about. Next is the follicular phase. After that is the ovulatory phase, where the ovulation occurs when the ovum is released from the Graafian follicle, like we just studied now. There are 2 hormones which are responsible for this process to happen. First is the follicle stimulating hormone or the FSH, and the second is the luteinizing hormone, which is LH. We have studied in the endocrine system chapter about the gonadotropic hormones. So these are the gonadotropic hormones which are helping the gonads to produce the gametes. Next is the luteal phase. The next topics which we are going to learn is fertilization and the formation of the embryo and all the processes thereafter. So what do you mean by fertilization? The fusion of the male gamete, that is the sperm, with the female gamete, which is the ovum, to form a cell which is known as zygote, is known as fertilization. So these two gametes, when they unite with one another, they can give rise to a new life, and the initial stage, the first cell which is formed right after fertilization, is known as zygote, and this entire process of unition is known as fertilization. So the two gametes are the sperm and the ovum. We are going to learn about their structures in detail. So as you can see, the structure of the sperm is given below. It consists of the head region, the middle region and the tail region. The head region consists of the acrosome and the nucleus of the sperm. The middle piece contains the mitochondria, and then there is the tail region. So what is the role of this acrosome? You can see in the figure below that it is the head region which is entering into the ovum. So this acrosome region, which is present in the head portion, it secretes an enzyme which is known as hyaluronidase. This name is very important, hyaluronidase. This enzyme helps the sperm to enter into the egg. So this nucleus in the sperm, since the sperm is a gamete, therefore it has half the number of chromosomes. So it has 23 chromosomes, and it can either have an X chromosome or it can either have an Y chromosome. If it is an X chromosome, the child will be a female, and if it contains a Y chromosome, the child will be a male. You have studied about this in the previous chapters. Also, when the sperm unites with the ovum, The ovum also contains 23 chromosomes. The sperm also contains 23 chromosomes. So when they mix up, the entire 46 chromosomes of the human is complete. So in this way, the 46 chromosome set is maintained. Now the mitochondria, which is present in the middle piece, it helps to provide energy to the sperm to move through the female reproductive tract so that it can go and meet the ovum. The tail helps in making lashing movements, just like the lashing movements made by the tail of a fish, and it helps the sperm to move forward. So each and every part of the sperm with its respective function is very important. Next, as you can see in the figure, the ovum is present and outside there are some protective cells which are known as zona pellucida, and the sperms enter the ovum in this manner. In the figure on the left hand side, you can see this is a real image of a sperm trying to enter an ovum. As you can see in the figure again, that there are 3 sperms around the ovum, but only one of them will enter into it. So it depends upon the sperm which is going to enter the ovum. So here are certain very important terms which are related to fertilization and pregnancy. Let's see. So what is zygote? Like I told you, the cell which is formed right after the sperm and the ovum join with one another, that cell is known as zygote. The fertilized egg is known as zygote. As soon as the sperm enters the ovum, it will release its nucleus into the ovum and the ovum gets fertilized. The cell which contains both the nucleus together, that cell is known as zygote. Next is the blastocyst, a small hollow ball of numerous cells. So as soon as the zygote is formed, it starts dividing rapidly and it forms a small hollow ball of a large number of cells. It is known as blastocyst. Now what is implantation? The blastocyst gets fixed to the wall of the uterus. This is known as implantation. So like we just saw how the blastocyst gets fixed into the wall of the uterus. So this process of fixing is known as implantation. It creates the effect called pregnancy. Next is the embryo, the growing egg after fertilization until the main parts of the body and the internal organs start forming. So as soon as fertilization occurs, like I told you, the zygote will start dividing rapidly. Until and unless the internal organs start forming, that particular structure will be known as embryo. And after the internal organs have formed nicely, or the structure now looks like a human baby, that structure is known as fetus. So question can come, what is the difference between embryo and fetus? Now what is pregnancy? This entire state of carrying the unborn young one inside the mother's body, it is known as pregnancy, and this state is produced as soon as implantation occurs, as soon as the blastocyst gets fixed into the uterus. There are 3 protective membranes which protect the growing embryo inside the mother's body. Obviously there is protection by the mother's body, but still there are a lot of other protections around the baby. So these protections are known as amnion, chorion and allantois. These 3 names are very important. Out of this, amnion we are going to learn in detail. So the amnion contains a fluid which is known as amniotic fluid, and obviously a fluid is there, that means it will protect the baby from mechanical injuries and shocks. Also it keeps an even pressure around the embryo so that the embryo does not face any extra pressure from any direction. It also allows the fetus to move inside the uterus. And also what happens, the fetus does not stick to the uterus. It remains suspended in that watery liquid by the help of this amnion. Now talking about another very important part which is known as placenta. It looks like a disc, like a flattened plate. So it is a special structure through which substances from the mother enters into the baby, and substances, or you can say wastes from the baby, moves into the mother's body and it is removed. So what are its important functions? The first is the diffusion of substances, obviously, like I told you. From the mother, what does this baby get? It gets oxygen, glucose, amino acids and other nutrition. And from the fetus, what is eliminated? Carbon dioxide, urea and other types of waste material. Because the baby cannot perform the activity of digestion and all of it is maintained by the placenta itself. Also, the placenta has another important activity. It also acts like an endocrine gland. So which hormone does it secrete? It secretes estrogen and progesterone. The female hormones is also secreted by the placenta during the time of pregnancy. Next is the umbilical cord. We all know about it a little bit, I guess. So the umbilical cord is a tube-like structure or a pipe-like structure which was initially connected to our navel region when we were kids, but it is removed later on. So this is the connection through which the placenta of our mother was connected to our body. Next are two terms which are very interlinked with one another. It is called parturition and gestation. So what are these terms? The full term of development of the embryo in the uterus is known as gestation. For humans it is 280 days. We generally say that it takes almost 9 months for the entire developmental process of a child inside the mother's body. So this entire time period is known as gestation. And what is parturition? The act of expelling the fetus from the mother's uterus is known as parturition. That means you can say childbirth. The process of childbirth, when the child is removed from the body of the mother, this process is known as parturition. So it happens after the gestational period has completed. Many of us have seen twins. Maybe we have relatives who are twins, or maybe we have seen people from our close circle. So twins are also of two types. One of them are identical in nature and the other are called fraternal twins. So what are the differences between these? As the name suggests, identical twins are exactly like one another. They look exactly like one another. It is very difficult to differentiate. And fraternal twins, they do not look same. They have different facial features. But what is the major cause for this? Sometimes what happens, there is a single ovum in the fallopian tube and a single sperm goes and fertilizes it. But while it moves back to the uterus, it divides into two halves. So each half will produce a baby. And since each half was getting divided from a single ovum, the babies formed will look alike. They will look same. Also, sometimes in rare cases what happens, there are two ovum in the fallopian tube and two different sperms go and fertilize each of them. As a result, they form fraternal twins. The twins are not alike. So this is the process of fertilization. Initially the ovum is present in the fallopian tube and many sperms will approach the ovum, but only one of them enters into the ovum. And the entire sperm does not enter into the ovum, rather it will release its nucleus into the ovum and that nucleus will meet with the nucleus of the ovum, and this process is called fertilization. After this process, immediately the cell starts dividing, and we are going to learn about the various stages in the next part. So this is how fertilization occurs. As you can see, there is a small yellow dot which I have made in the fallopian tubes. So this is the ovum which is present in the fallopian tube. It happens during the stages of the menstrual cycle, like I told you. And what happens, through the cervix portion or through the vaginal portion, the sperms will enter in this manner. So the sperms have that tail region which helps it to move, and therefore they are able to move against gravity into the female body, and they will move towards the fallopian tube. If there is an ovum there, the sperm will try to enter the ovum, and if by chance the sperm is able to successfully enter the ovum and fertilize it, the ovum starts its journey again back to the uterus. So how does it happen? So just imagine fertilization has occurred. Now the ovum, which is dividing continuously, it will move back from the fallopian tube, and the blastocyst stage, which we just learned, that will go and stick with the uterine wall. And then the process of pregnancy continues.